Optics that utilize spooky science to deliver fixed magnification in a compact package. Today we're looking at Prism scopes. What is up, guys? My name is John with PewPewTactical.com, your definitive source for gun reviews, gear guides, and all things that go bang. If you're at least reasonably well-versed in gun terminology, you've probably heard the phrase prism optic thrown around before, but what exactly does that phrase mean? Long story short, compared to a regular scope that uses an objective and ocular lens to focus light and deliver a magnified image to your eye, a prism scope is going to replace the lenses that gather light with, well, a prism. The overall effect is that you can achieve the same level of magnification in a much smaller package, although only to a point. You're not going to replace a dedicated long-range optic with a prism most likely, but given that prism optics are going to offer you mid-range zoom and an illuminated reticle, they make a great choice that sort of walks a weird line in between a red dot and a traditional magnified scope, but in a smaller package than an LPVO. In our opinion, this makes them ideal as a battle sight for carbines, as their flexibility means that they can generally be used at both close, mid, and occasionally longer ranges quite comfortably. Prism optics definitely have their own cheering section online, and many folks seem to enjoy the fact that because you've got an etched reticle, you still have a functional rifle scope even if you aren't using batteries, though every model that we've got here today does have some kind of illumination. Internet scuttlebutt also suggests that prism optics are going to be much better for folks who suffer from astigmatism as well compared to a holographic or a red dot sight, though we have no way to test this because none of us... We had the opportunity to take a look at a bunch of different prism optics that occupy all sorts of different price ranges and square them up against one another, and boy do we have some thoughts about them. First up, we've got the Primary Arms ACSS Cyclops. Now, right off the bat, I'll admit that I'm maybe a little bit biased in that I don't particularly see the point of a 1x optic if it's not a red dot or a holographic sight. The concept just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Again, as I mentioned, prism optics might be a great alternative for folks who suffer from astigmatism, but my eyes are generally pretty okay outside of whatever damage I've done to them as a result of being extremely online, so... The Cyclops isn't a bad optic per se. The build quality is actually great and is nothing short of what you'd expect from Primary Arms. The anodized flat dark earth finish looks and feels fantastic, and it's nice that the cover for the elevation and windage adjustment turrets are attached to the body of the optic with steel cable, despite the fact that it can make adjusting them on the fly a little bit of a pain. The Cyclops features Primary Arms' signature ACSS reticle, which we personally have quite enjoyed when we've used it on some of their other magnified optics, but on this 1x prism scope, it leaves a little bit to be desired. A 1x optic that still requires you to find the right eye relief standoff point feels wonky as all hell. I assume probably the majority of you watching have some sort of experience with a red dot or a holo sight, but imagine having to be lined up perfectly with the optic in order to attain your sight picture, while still having no extra magnification to speak of. Why this is a thing, I have no idea, but it is extremely not my jam. The illumination is unfortunately pretty underwhelming as well. Even on the highest setting, I was struggling to pick up the ACSS reticle in the admittedly bright conditions we were shooting in. In fairness, the optic isn't advertised as being daylight bright, and the illumination is visible in dim conditions, so it might be okay if you plan on hunting Draculas or whatever. I feel about the same with regards to the Cyclops as I did with our 1.5x ACOG we reviewed a little while back. Both optics bill themselves as being geared specifically for fast target engagement in CQB environments, but I'm sort of struggling to understand why you'd choose something like this over a normal red dot unless you're afflicted with the previously mentioned astigmatism issues. It's sort of hard to objectively review an optic when the main reason that you might want to use it is if you've got a medical condition that I don't have. But at an MSRP of about $240, it's gonna be a no for me, dog. Up next, we've got a 2x prism optic from Monstrum. I'm not generally one to hate on entry-level optics, as I think that they can be a great way for newer shooters to ease into the world of glass without breaking the bank, and the Monstrum has some pretty solid reviews on Amazon. However, that being said, I'm not sure that the Monstrum is going to be exactly what you're looking for if that sounds like an accurate description of you. The optic features 2x magnification, which is obviously a little bit higher mag than the 1x from primary arms, but it still sort of suffers from the same symptoms as the Cyclops. It's also worth noting that we ordered the 3x from Amazon and were sent the 2x instead, which we were able to verify because the two have completely different reticles. The optics mount is actually a little bit lower profile than everything else in the Prism lineup, and I suspect that's kind of the core root of the issue here. Assuming you're throwing this thing on a standard AR-15, the height of the mount is going to ensure that the front of your rail and your weak side hand are going to blurrily occupy the lower third of your field of view, which just feels obnoxious and distracting, and may not co-witness with your irons either. As you'd probably expect, the illumination here is also next to worthless in bright conditions, but it does have 5 levels of adjustable brightness in both red and green flavors that might be okay if you're shooting in overcast or more dim conditions. The reticle itself is a simple circle with a dot at the center, with the outer ring being about 24 MOA at 100 yards. We have no real complaints about the quality of the glass itself on the Monstrum, but while scrutinizing it for review, we did realize that there are sort of tiny black flecks on the front lens, and it's not that big of an issue. In all honesty, it's a little bit nitpicky, but you may notice them if you are looking for them. What we did have an issue with, however, is the fact that the windage and elevation adjustment turrets inexplicably seem to be reversed. While zeroing the optic, we fired at our steel target and noticed that our rounds were hitting off to the right. As one does, we followed the indicated arrows on the windage adjustment turret and began to bring our reticle over to the right as well to get our point of aim to match up with our point of impact. However, despite the fact that we were adjusting the windage turret correctly, our point of impact continued to walk out further to the right. We realized shortly afterwards what exactly was happening here and began to adjust the windage turret back the other way, which is technically incorrect, and eventually got the optics zeroed. Again, not a huge issue, but how the hell does that happen from a quality control standpoint? You can make the argument that this is an $80 budget optic, and maybe you should expect some wonkiness, but I guess my main issue with it is that the scope is mainly geared towards beginners who might not realize right away what's going on, and that just seems sort of shitty. And before anyone freaks out, we have found comments echoing that same exact sentiment on the review page on Monstrum's website themselves, lest anyone thinks that this issue stemmed from us just being dumbasses. Again, sub $100 is pretty inexpensive, all things considered, for a Prism optic, and if you're okay with all of that aforementioned wonkiness, maybe you'll have a better time with the optic than I did, but Up next, we've got Vortex's Spitfire, a 3x prism optic that boasts 5 levels of red and green illumination, a reticle with built-in BDC estimates out to 500 meters, and 2 Picatinny rails set at 45-degree angles for the addition of micro red dots on either side of the optic. The Spitfire is honestly the first prism in the review that I actually enjoyed using. Even though the illumination still leaves a bit to be desired, the 3x magnification and the quality of the glass itself meant that I wasn't struggling to see past my own thumb in my field of view, and nothing really drives home how much glass quality matters like using optics that aren't quite as clear before moving on to those that are. The Spitfire also features more wire cable tetherings for the turret adjustment caps. Again, a cool feature just like on the PA-1X, but introducing dirt and dust into the system can occasionally mean that you've got to wrestle the cables out of locking the turrets up. Battery life is reasonable, clocking in at about 250 hours on the brightest setting and up to 3000 on the lowest. But again, the illumination is not really a selling point for me out here in Sunland. For me personally, I don't particularly see the point in running a magnified optic below 3x, so the Spitfire is just about the minimum that makes sense for utilizing on a rifle if you're specifically looking at prism optics. The overall build quality is what you'd expect from Vortex, i.e. it's pretty damn solid, but you can rest assured that the optic is backed up by Vortex's infamous lifetime warranty. Although it's a pretty big price jump at an MSRP of $349, the Vortex Spitfire is probably about the price ballpark you should be looking at or expecting in order to snag something that's actually worth it, in my opinion. Overall, the Spitfire gets a thumbs up from me. Moving on and standing as an almost direct competitor to the Vortex Spitfire, we've got the Primary Arms SL3X. When I say that these two prisms are similar, I really mean it, and I think it's kind of obvious that at a certain point, there's only so much that two companies can do to differentiate a product when they're likely using the same overseas factories. That being said, I'm going to say that the Primary Arms SLX slightly edges out the Vortex Spitfire for a few reasons. The SLX3 features the ACSS reticle that's standard on a lot of Primary Arms' offerings, this time in a CQB configuration with an outer ring that surrounds the familiar horseshoe in the center. While we won't get into the nitty-gritty of what all the ACSS does from a feature standpoint, we do quite enjoy the fact that it's got BDC calculations out to 600 meters, and includes hold marks for both wind and engaging moving targets. The reticle itself should be accurate for the vast majority of 5.56 cartridges on the market, and can also be used for 308 and 545x39 as well, though we haven't had the opportunity to test the latter too. Additionally, the mount includes a removable spacer to ensure you've got a comfortable cheek weld on both AR-15 and AK-type platforms. The SLX3 is also the first Prism out of those we tested with actual functional illumination. Even in our bright-ass Californian meth desert conditions, we were able to pick up the reticle easily on the highest setting, and it makes us wonder why this is such a difficult thing to nail for other manufacturers. The SLX3 has got a small pick rail section just forward of the elevation adjustment turret, and both turret caps are held in place by a rubbery polymer piece that we feel is a bit of a better solution than the steel wires we've addressed previously. Considering the fact that the Primary Arms SLX3 is sitting at an MSRP of about $289, I personally feel like it's probably the better optic compared to the Spitfire, if only for the fact that the illumination is actually usable. If you're sold on the features of the SLX3 but maybe want a little bit more magnification, you are in luck. Primary Arms also makes the SLX5, which is a prism optic with 5x magnification that still features the ACSS reticle, and has a little bit larger objective lens to boot. It is worth noting that every prism that we've looked at so far all come with these really bad flip-up covers, and we didn't really know where else to talk about this, but they're terrible, just throw them away. The SLX5 ditches the CQB reticle and gives you the straightforward ACSS horseshoe you might be familiar with if you've used a Primary Arms optic before, or have watched our review of their 1:6 low power variable optic. Outside of the higher magnification and the slightly larger lens, the reticle of the SLX5 features selective illumination that only lights up the horseshoe itself, considering you likely don't need the CQB-oriented setup where the entire reticle is illuminated. It works great, and at just $330 or so is only slightly more expensive than the SLX3. Again, if you're looking for something a little bit more long-range oriented and you don't really need the CQB-centric reticle of the SLX3, the SLX5 is probably going to be a great choice for you. Last but certainly not least, we've got the Sig Bravo 5. Straight away, the Bravo 5 takes the cake for the hottest prism on this list. The Bravo 5 features 5x magnification and an absurdly large FOV due to some dark arts that Sig has taken to calling Megaview, which by the way is a trademark term, as if anyone on the planet was going to steal that combination of words. I won't pretend to understand the science behind Megaview TM, but the optic boasts a roughly 40% larger field of view than competing prism optics, and it definitely shows after using them all in one day. The quality of the glass on the Bravo 5 is also fantastic. Not that any of the previous optics we tested were bad by any means, but compared to the clarity that Sig puts forward, they all pale a tiny bit in comparison. The reticle itself is another horseshoe type, this time with bullet drop markings all the way out to 800 meters, with some windage hash marks as well. The illumination on the Bravo 5, for once, is bright. Like really bright, and good lord do we appreciate that. The optic's got 8 levels of brightness indicated by the size of the red square on the illumination knob, in addition to having 3 levels of brightness specifically for night vision compatibility. Sig notes that the Bravo 5 is purpose-built so that the center line of the optical axis sits at exactly 1.535 inches above the top of a standard Picatinny rail for night vision compatibility. Although we don't currently have the means to test this, we assume that the Bravo 5 should sit at the perfect height in order to interface with something like a PVS-14 if you've got it mounted directly to the rifle itself. Up towards the front, you've got 3 Picatinny rail segments on the 12, 3, and 9 o'clock positions of the optic for mounting, well, whatever you'd like to. Probably the only comparable optic we've ever reviewed on the channel is going to be the 6X ACOG from a video we did a few months ago. And honestly, I'd say the Bravo 5 beats it. I really enjoy the fact that the Bravo 5 doesn't really sit as far back over your rear sight and charging handle like the 6X ACOG does, meaning that if you need to reload or operate your charging handle for any reason, you're not fighting against the optic to do so. The Bravo 5's illumination on the highest setting is much brighter than the ACOG's, the optic overall weighs a lot less, and its field of view is larger. I know this is probably starting to sound like an ad for the Bravo 5, but this is just me legitimately being stoked on an optic that I can't really find a lot of negatives for, outside of perhaps its slightly chunky weight of about 23 ounces. At a current street price of $399, the Bravo 5 certainly isn't inexpensive, but in our opinions, it definitely punches above its weight for the price point, and is easily one of the nicest optics we've ever had the pleasure of toying around with. Obviously, if price is no concern for you, we have no issues with giving it our full recommendation over all of the other optics on this list. Hopefully we have given you enough information for you to make your own informed purchase, as none of the optics that we've reviewed here today are bad by any means, even if I didn't really personally jive with them. The bottom line is, depending on your personal needs and ability to spend cash on gun glass, we're positive that there's going to be something in this list that works for you, even if I think that the idea of a 1x sight that isn't a red dot is fundamentally stupid. Also, considering the fact that ACOGs are technically Prism optics as well, and we have used them as a benchmark and reference point throughout this video, we'll go ahead and drop a link in the description below in case you wanted to check out our previous video review of said ACOGs. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, as we've got lots more optic reviews on the way. Once again, my name is John with Pew Pew Tactical, and we will see you next time.